Have you ever walked into a room and immediately started performing? Not lying, not faking, just turning the volume up on a version of yourself that you knew the room would receive better than whatever you actually were in that moment? You didn't even decide to do it. It just happened. That's Francesco Bernoulli.
And one of the fastest cars in the world, Francesco Bernoulli.
It is an honor, Signore Dorado.
And most people watch Cars 2 and see a punchline. An arrogant Italian racing car who talks too much. But there's something underneath that nobody talks about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Francesco doesn't open the movie quietly. He never does anything quietly. He's on television, he's on a talk show, and he's already doing the thing he does, which is filling every single available inch of space with himself. His name, his wins, his open wheels, which he mentions constantly. He talks about himself in the third person like he's narrating his own documentary. And the easy read on this is ego.
The Lightning McQueen would not have a chance against Francesco.
Simple, arrogant athlete, loves the sound of his own voice. Done. But watch what happens when the cameras are off. There's no scene in Cars 2 where Francesco is alone and still. He doesn't get still. Every moment he's in, he's performing, calibrating, adjusting to the audience in the room. That's not confidence. That's maintenance.
Francesco is triple speed.
Real confidence doesn't need the room to confirm it every few minutes. Francesco does. He needs the reaction. He needs to see it land. Watch his face when something doesn't get the response he expected. Watch him recalibrate immediately. That's not a car who believes in himself. That's a car who believes in the performance of believing in himself. And those are two completely different things. Here's what's wild about the way this movie sets him up. Lightning McQueen is the underdog in the first film. By Cars 2, he's the world champion. He's already earned the thing. He doesn't need to prove it anymore. And then Francesco shows up, and within about 4 minutes, Lightning's already rattled. He's taking the bait.
Queen, we still got room for one more racer.
Crew's off for the season, so... You know what? They just got back.
He's agreeing to a race he didn't plan on running because someone who knew exactly how to push his buttons pushed them. And we're supposed to laugh at Francesco for being over the top. But I keep thinking about this. Francesco knew exactly what buttons to push. He knew exactly how to get Lightning defensive, how to make him need to prove something. That's not an accident, that's a skill, and skills come from practice. Francesco has spent a long time studying what makes people need to respond to him. He's built a machine for generating reactions, and that machine is himself.
Francesco is familiar with this reaction to Francesco.
So where does that come from? Nobody builds that kind of performance without a reason. Nobody learns to fill a room with that much noise unless at some point the quiet was dangerous, or the quiet meant something was being decided without you. I know this one. Not the racing, not the Italian thing, obviously, but that specific instinct, the one where you learn that if you control the introduction, if you set the terms of how the room sees you before the room gets to decide, you're safer. You don't get blindsided. You get to be the version of yourself that works. Francesco's version works extremely well. He's famous. He's beloved in Italy. There are fans. There is a mother. His mom loves him, and she's in the crowd, and he talks to her with this open warmth that he doesn't perform. He just does it. And that's the thing. That tiny, unguarded moment with his mother. That's the only time in the whole film where Francesco doesn't seem to be doing anything for anyone.
I will beat his crybaby bottom today!
He's just there, and it lasts about 12 seconds before he's back to Francesco Bernoulli, world champion, open wheels, the whole show. But you saw it. It was there. At this juncture, the discussion transcends the narrative about one particular racing car. Because the version of this that's really worth talking about isn't the character specifically, it's the pattern. You've met this person. Maybe you've been this person. The one who gets into a room and immediately starts doing a version of themselves that's curated, polished, slightly louder than necessary. Not because they are dishonest, not because they don't have anything real underneath, but because somewhere along the way, they figured out that the real version was harder to control. The real version could get rejected. The real version could sit there quietly and have the room decide it wasn't enough. But the performance doesn't get rejected the same way.
Francesco understands.
Because if the room doesn't respond, you can adjust the performance. You can't adjust yourself. And so the performance becomes the thing that goes in front of everything. Every introduction, every first impression, every moment where the stakes feel high. You lead with the version that works, and you let the real one trail behind it at a safe distance. There's a particular psychology at work here that extends far beyond any single character study. The mechanism of constant self-presentation builds over time into something almost architectural. It becomes the framework through which you navigate the world. Each interaction reinforces the pattern. Each successful performance validates the strategy. And with each validation, the original self retreats a little further. What starts as a useful tool becomes something more like a permanent installation. You stop thinking of it as something you're doing. and start thinking of it as something you are. The distinction matters because it changes the stakes of eventually stopping. If it's something you do, you can choose to do something else. If it's something you are, then changing it means changing at a fundamental level. Francesco the performance for so long that he might not remember a time before. Or perhaps there was no time before. Perhaps he was always like this, always needing the room to confirm his existence. Or perhaps the need came early, and everything since has been an answer to that original need. Francesco Bernoulli is not an insecure character in the way that Poe is insecure, or in the way Tai Lung is. He's not visibly struggling. He doesn't seem to be in pain. He's winning. He's loud. He's having what appears to be a genuinely great time. And that's exactly what makes the pattern harder to see. Because we associate insecurity with smallness, with the kid in the corner who won't make eye contact. We don't associate it with the guy doing a victory lap before the race even started. But insecurity doesn't always look like shrinking. Sometimes it looks like expansion.
Really? Your speed? Francesco is triple speed.
Sometimes it looks like taking up every available inch of space before anyone else can decide how much space you deserve. Francesco doesn't wait to be received. He announces himself.
Francesco is triple speed.
Every time. And announcing yourself that loudly, that consistently, with that kind of precision.
Oh, Francesco likes this McQueen. It's really...
That takes practice. And practice means you started young. We don't get Francesco's backstory the way we get Tigris's backstory, or Tai Lung's backstory. This is Cars 2, and not that kind of movie. But the psychology is still there if you're looking at the right things. There's a moment when Francesco and Lightning are actually in a real conversation. Not sparring, not performing at each other for the cameras. And Francesco says something about racing being his life. Not his career. His life. And Lightning sort of hears it and moves on, but I don't. Because there's a difference between loving what you do and having what you do be the entire structure of who you are. Francesco doesn't seem to have an off switch. He doesn't have a version of himself that exists separately from the racing identity. The fast car,
and those open wheels,
the wins, the crowd. That's not just what he does. That appears to be what he is. And when your entire self-concept lives inside a performance, the performance can never stop. Because if it stops, you don't know what's left. And not knowing what's left is terrifying. Consider what this means developmentally. A child learns early that certain behaviors generate attention, approval, safety. Those behaviors become reliable. They become preferred. They start to accumulate into a consistent presentation. The child becomes known for being this kind of kid. The kid who makes people laugh. The kid who impresses adults. The kid who wins. And somewhere in that process, the child stops being separate from the behavior. The behavior becomes the kid. Years pass, and the behavior has become so sophisticated, so thoroughly integrated into everything this person does, that it's barely noticeable anymore. It just looks like personality, like charm, like talent. But underneath, if you look closely, you can still see the original calculation. The constant assessment of the room, the perpetual adjustment, the inability to be still. These are the residues of an old system that was once survival. Now they're just how Francesco exists. They're automatic. They're invisible to him because he's been running them his entire life. Here's the thing about performative people that nobody says clearly. They're often genuinely good at what they do. Francesco is actually fast. He's actually talented. The wins aren't fabricated. The skill is real. And that makes the whole thing more complicated, not less. Because the performance isn't covering up incompetence. It's covering up the fear that the competence isn't enough on its own. That if you strip the presentation down to just the work, just the actual thing without the noise around it, people might look at it and find it ordinary, or find something missing, or just decide they liked you better when you were putting on a show. And so you never let them see it without the show. You bundle the real thing so tightly inside the performance that eventually you can't separate them yourself. Francesco, the racer, and Francesco, the performance of Francesco the racer, have been the same thing for so long that he probably couldn't tell you where one ends and the other begins. And that's the cost, not the arrogance, not the talking too much. The cost is that you never actually find out what the room thinks of you, because the room has only ever met the performance. Most people would call this confidence. The people around Francesco do. The announcers do. His fans definitely do. And from the outside, it looks exactly like confidence because the symptoms are identical. He walks in tall. He speaks first. He doesn't apologize for taking up space. He expects to win and acts accordingly. Confidence from the outside looks like that. But confidence from the inside feels different. Confidence from the inside is quiet. It doesn't need the third-person narration. It doesn't need to fill the silence before anyone else can. Confidence can sit across from Lightning McQueen at a table and just be there without engineering the interaction. Francesco cannot do that. Francesco will not do that. Because the silence is where the room gets to decide. And Francesco decided a long time ago that he doesn't leave that to anyone else. I know this one too. Not the racing car version. My version was different, smaller scale. But that specific habit of entering a room and immediately clocking what the room needed, and then providing it. The habit of making the performance so smooth that nobody asked what was underneath it, because why would they? The surface was working fine. I spent a long time thinking that was confidence. I thought the fact that I could walk into almost any room and make it work meant something good about who I was. And it did mean something, but it also meant I hadn't let anyone actually meet me in years. Because meeting me meant taking the performance offline, and I didn't know how to do that anymore. And I didn't know when I'd lost the ability. It had just kind of slipped. The performance got more reliable, and the real version got less practiced. And at some point I couldn't find the on-ramp back. That's Francesco standing next to his mother in the stands. That's the 12 seconds. And then back to the show. Watch what happens when Francesco actually loses.
McQueen's the winner. Francesco second.
Not when he gets a bad position or has a rough lap. When he loses. When Lightning beats him at the end of the race. And Francesco's reaction is
This is impossible.
That's what I'm talking about.
not theatrical surprise for the cameras. Actual surprise. Because the performance includes winning. The performance has always included winning. The performance was built partly on a foundation of winning. And the wins are real, and so the identity is real, and the whole structure holds. And then it doesn't. And the look on his face in that moment is the closest thing the movie gives us to who Francesco is without the show running. He's disoriented. He doesn't know how to be Francesco Bernoulli in a world where Francesco Bernoulli just lost. And it only lasts a moment. Because he recalibrates fast. He's very good at recalibrating. He finds the angle. He finds the frame that lets him be gracious in a way that still sounds like Francesco. And he does it. And it works. And you almost missed the moment before. But the moment before was real. That was the crack. The reason this matters, the reason it's worth talking about beyond just analyzing an animated car, is that performative confidence is one of the most effective and most isolating things a person can build around themselves. Effective because it works. People respond to it. You get opportunities. You get reception. You get the crowd and the wins and the mother in the stands who loves you. And isolating. Because every person who connects with you is connecting with the performance. And you know that. You know it every time someone says they love being around you, and you feel something slightly off about the compliment because you're pretty sure they'd feel differently about the version that stays home. And you can never test it, because testing it means turning the performance off, and you've been running it so long you're not sure what the fuse situation looks like. Whether it turns off cleanly or whether shutting it down means the whole structure comes down with it. Francesco doesn't get a redemption arc in Cars 2. He doesn't have a breakthrough. He doesn't take the mask off. He ends the film more or less how he started it. Loud, fast, himself in whatever way he's decided himself means. And that's actually the honest version of this story. Because most people who build this particular thing don't dismantle it in the third act. They just keep running it. Maybe they get a little better at finding those 12-second moments. Maybe they get a little more comfortable with the crack showing. But the performance doesn't end. It adjusts. It gets more sophisticated. It gets more tired sometimes. And underneath it, if you're lucky, something real keeps running quietly, waiting, not loudly, not with open wheels, just there,